saying to you while watching the expert after.
Well, it looks like it's that time of year again, spooky season, which means a spooky video is in order to be made. Halloween is still the only holiday I actually celebrate, and has been my favorite holiday for as long as I can remember. I love the whole spooky atmosphere that Halloween evokes, and with the spooky season being upon us, what other better way to celebrate but with indie horror games? Another year, another round of indie horror games. Last year, when we took a look at indie horror games, we looked at some of the most well-known indie horror games. You know, Tattletale, Five Nights at Freddy's, and Hello Neighbor, the big boys. However, this year, we're going to do it a little differently. Instead of looking at the most popular, we're going to look at some of the most classic indie horror games. I always mention how indie horror games nowadays are really, really bad. However, I decided I'm getting tired of talking about how bad indie horror games are nowadays. So this year, I decided I'm going to take a trip back in time to some more classical indie horror games. Classic indie horror games are a completely different beast compared to the indie horror games of today. While most indie horror games today focus on cheap jump scares and terrible lore, classic indie horror games more focus on actually giving the player a good experience. However, these three indie horror games we're going to be discussing today are in their leagues of their own. While each of them are not perfect, it doesn't mean they're bad. Far from it, my friends. But which ones are they? Well, in order to find out, stay tuned. So, get your bowl of candy and your pumpkin spice latte as we look at another round of indie horror games. But before we begin, go down and hit the like and subscribe button. It helps me out a lot more than you think. It's free and only takes 5 seconds to do. And share this video with everyone you can. My goal is to eventually hit 100k, so if you want to be part of that, you know what to do. With that all being said, let's dive into some classic indie horror games. Being first released on October 24th, 2014, Spooky's House of Jumpscares, or Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion, has made a huge impact on the indie horror game scene. There's a few reasons why Spooky's House of Jumpscares stood out among the rest of the indie horror game slop at the time. From the unique premise of going through 1,000 rooms to the interesting gameplay elements, like introducing a new enemy every handful of rooms, and different scenarios along with them. But the biggest reason without a doubt was the ability it had to effortlessly blend the cute cartoon style with more horrifying concepts and monster designs from previously untapped potential that indie horror games beforehand tried to replicate. These horrifying concepts came from Spooky's House of Jumpscare's standout features, the specimens. Each new specimen you encounter introduces its own horrifying concept, design, and ideas, and in some cases its own location. Spooky's House of Jumpscares entirely hinges on how scary the specimens actually are. The specimens in Spooky's House of Jumpscares ranges from evil ink monsters at the N64 graphics turned horror show, and even all the way up to on-the-nose horror reference with a slight hint of gore. Wonderful! Each base game specimen are unique and different compared to each other. No one specimen feels similar design-wise. Gameplay-wise, yeah, they're basically all the same. However, that's not the fault of the specimens. The way Spooky's House of Jumpscares works is you're thrown into a giant mansion being forced to go through 1,000 rooms, each room being randomly generated between a few handfuls of rooms. You have purple dungeon, slimy sewers, and even medieval torture rooms. However, each room, despite having basically the same layout and theming, are still kept fresh by the fact that every few rooms, a new specimen is thrown into the ring, each time getting more and more deadly. While most of the specimens just simply chase you into a certain amount of rooms gone by, some specimens add special features onto the chase like specimens 6 and 13. Then there's some specimens just have visual and audible effects. However, Spooky's House of Jumpscares is far more than just endlessly walking through rooms and being chased by scary monsters. No, there's something much more about Spooky's House of Jumpscares. The best way I can describe Spooky's House of Jumpscares is atmospheric, poetic, an experience. It's not that deep. Spooky's House of Jumpscare is very much what you see is what you get. There's no hiding it. However, just because it's rather basic doesn't mean it doesn't have potential to be an actually scary indie horror game. Let's get into that. As always, let's begin with how the game actually begins. When booting up the game for the first time, you get this classic spooky song, which actually has an earlier unused version of it. The song's called The House That Spooky Built. I think this song is the perfect song to represent Spooky's House of Jump Scares. The way the song starts off is a perfect distraction from the fact that you are indeed playing a horror game, which is paralleled by the gameplay and art style. This only applies to the new version, as the old version starts off as an actual horror song compared to the light newer version. Enough dilly-dallying on the music, let's actually get into the gameplay. Upon starting the game, you come face to face with who else but Spooky. Oh my god, like the title of the game. Spooky here tells you your goal is to reach the end of 1,000 rooms, and that might actually not be an end, because who knows? Not even she knows. Great. For a lot of this game, you're all alone. The only thing keeping you company is the sound of thunder outside and your own footsteps. It creates a very eerie atmosphere walking through these endless halls with nothing but your own footsteps. It's a very tense feeling, especially when you have these long stretches of hallways with only a door at the end. Despite having its cartoonish art style, Spooky's House of Jump Scares is still able to make you feel uneasy. It's not until you get into a few rooms in where you finally get to meet your first specimen, Specimen 1, or these cardboard cutouts. That's it. I guess at this point I should probably mention the fact that this game is a parody of very serious horror games that have an over-reliance on jump scares. You know, games like Five Nights at Freddy's. On top of that, this game's gameplay is intentionally boring as a false sense of security. You know, walking through 1,000 rooms that look almost identical is pretty boring. However, you soon realize when you get to a certain amount of rooms that you've been tricked. This isn't a game about walking through rooms, it's a game about surviving horrible monsters. Spooky's House of Jump Scares, like a bunch of other indie horror games I've discussed, is a psychological horror game. While it's really not that deep compared to something like From the Darkness or The Mortuary Assistant, it's still enough to keep the player on edge. Because walking into a new room, you don't have an inkling of a clue if something's going to be there waiting for you. Now don't get me wrong, despite this game intentionally being a boring game, it really is just a boring game. A new specimen shows up every few rooms, and what I mean by that, I mean every few hundred or so. I still think Spooky's House of Jump Scares succeeds at being a psychological horror game with the specimens, as each one of them are more than meets the eye. Each specimen has a detailed backstory for you to discover, but we'll get into that when the time comes. Specimen 1 generally is one of the worst parts of this game. Walking down a long hallway, you always expect Specimen 1 to pop out, and I guess it was probably the intended purpose of Specimen 1, but eventually it just gets annoying, because Specimen 1 doesn't just pop out of the wall, there's also an air bleeding sound that plays, which one of the sounds is also a sound from Five Nights at Wario's, which I find funny. Eventually going through enough rooms, you'll discover a note. Now, notes in Spooky's House of Jump Scares are primarily used to tell stories of people trapped in the mansion, or as pieces of lore pertaining to each specimens. Some notes even appear on Specimen 1. However, most of them are not very important. Although, one of them does contain a certain sequence of events that stuck with me long after finishing Mark's playthrough. There's always been one line in this game that I've been obsessed with solely because it stuck with me all these years. Throughout the game on your adventure, you'll stumble upon some notes. The first notes that you read are from a person only named Romantic Victim. The person writes about how he thought the mansion would be a romantic place to be. As you read more notes, he starts getting the feeling that someone's following him. He starts to realize that the rooms he's going through seem to be the same room he's already passed. At the end of the second note, he claims how thirsty he is. The next note, he writes that he drank ink and the taste was obviously not good. Note 4, he wakes to find something next to him that seems to be red wine. After taking a drink, he states that it has a strong metallic taste, and of course, how unromantic his situation is. The fifth note only contains one line: I don't think that was wine. Note 6, he starts to realize that the rooms are not repeating, they're just a lot of rooms. Or he thinks someone's taking his notes. Note 7, he identifies the fact that he might die soon, and this might be his last note. Even in death, he still thinks it was romantic. Now, there are other people's notes you can come across instead of Romantic Victim. There are 2 other victims that are randomly generated. However, Romantic Victim is the one that's most relevant. Upon going into the next few rooms, you'll find a lone note sitting on a table with what seems to be a puddle of ink. Now, if you remember, he drank ink, so this could be the remains of Romantic Victim. However, that's not the case, but I'll get into that in a minute. Upon reading the note, you get the line I've been building up to. Spouting, splashing, soaking, innards ingest invoking, nailing never stops, the choking. A loud choking sound can be heard behind you, and upon putting the note down, you come face to face with Specimen 2. It's that line in particular that's always stuck with me for just how vague it is and how telling it is. There's always been something about that line that I couldn't put my finger on why it stuck with me so much. Could it be the fact that it's the introduction to Specimen 2? Could it be how grim the line is itself? No. What I think it is that it's not only the introduction to Specimen 2, but the tonal shift from being a boring cutesy horror game to what Spooky's House of Jump Scares is, a psychological horror. And this is made ever so clearer by the main enemies, the specimens. The specimens in Spooky's House of Jumpscare are some of the most unique monster designs I would say in indie horror game history. While most of them are not totally original, they take already existing concepts and add on to them. However, some of them are more unique than others and are almost completely original ideas. Specimens 1, 2, 6, 8, and 9 all have, for the most part, unique designs and concepts. However, that doesn't mean the other specimens, although they are based on already existing concepts, don't have unique spins on said already existing concepts. For example, Specimen 13 is clearly based off of a siren from Greek mythology. However, what makes Specimen 13 unique compared to already existing siren enemies in other horror games is the fact that you only see her once. When you get too close to her, she dives into the water, which initializes this chase where, unlike other chases in the game, brute forcing your way through is not a viable option, as if you stay in the water too long, she'll kill you, and she's significantly more faster than you are. Then you have other specimens like Specimen 4 and 5 being based off of already existing properties, Specimen 4 being based off the Ring, and Specimen 5 being based off the Silent Hill. Despite this, Spooky's House of Jumpscares introduced them in such a way that makes them feel unique compared to their original source material. While in concept and in design they're almost one-to-one with the original counterparts, Specimen 4 also introduces the first fully unique environment outside of the normal mansion, in the form of the schoolhouse. Editor's note, that's not true, I forgot about Specimen 3. Multiple of the specimens actually throw you into a unique environment. It makes almost every specimen chase more unique. And trust me, there's a bunch of unique cases in Spooky Sets of Jumpscares, like the Food Demon, or as I call it, Fairy. Okay, he's here, he's fucking here, he's fucking here. Cheeseburger Man's here. Fucking go. The cheeseburger's man's here. Fucking McCheese. Which also leads me to the fact that each specimen's chase is unique compared to the other specimens. Specimen 2 and Specimen 4 have the most basic chases. However, Specimen 2 shakes things up by adding toxic sludge on a floor that slows the player down. Specimen 7, 8, and 11 have visual effects that mess up the player's screen, making it harder to run from them, especially Specimen 11. Then you have Specimens 6, 10, and 13. These specimens differ their chase by making you slow down. All the other specimens' chases, as the names imply, make you run from the specimen chasing you. However, these specimens force you to slow down. Specimen 10 specifically forces you to slow down, or there will be consequences. The other specimens force you to slow down by having gimmicks that make brute forcing your way through the room impossible. The way Specimen 6 works is upon Specimen 6 starting his chase, you are required to look at him. Looking away for even a second, he'll disappear. And if you look away for too long, he starts to damage you, which, as you could probably imagine, not being able to see where you're going because you have to stare this monster down, makes it so you have to slow down. Specimen 13 works by making you traverse crates and staying out of the water unless you want to get killed. Staying in the water for too long, Specimen 13 starts to kill you. And then there's Specimen 10. Specimen 10 is unique in the fact that you physically have to slow down, while Specimen 6 and 13 you could kinda get through it fast if you were smart about it. Specimen 10 punishes you for trying to brute force your way through his encounter. If you get too ahead of Specimen 10, he'll turn into this parasite worm and become significantly more faster than you, meaning through the entire chase you have to stay within his range. Failing to do so will result in the parasite worm. And this thing hits hard. It only takes 3 hits to kill you, which is honestly a welcome change of pace. Another grim feature that all the specimens have is actually having a fatality count in their cat DOS entry. Every specimen from 1 all the way up to 13 have fatalities. Yes, even Specimen 1 has fatalities. Only 4, and the method is by heart attacks. Another detail that the cat DOS entries provide is the method each specimen has for killing their victims, which some of them being kinda goofies, like Specimen 1's killing method of heart attacks. Then there's Specimens 5, 7, 9, and 11 whose method of killing is labeled as unknown, which is weird because Specimen 11 has the second highest total fatalities with 317. Then there's common specimens like Specimens 2, 3, 6, and 10 who have fairly normal methods of killing like physical tearing, physical punctures, biting, and infections. However, there's a handful of specimens who have deeply disturbing methods of killing. Specimens 4, 8, and 13 have some disturbing methods, like drowning, absorption, and consumption. The last two being a lot of people's fetish. God damn it! There's a certain specimen that needs to be discussed, and that's Specimen 9, or the Taker. The Taker is an anomaly within Spooky's House of Jumpscares. No other specimen is quite like the Taker, or as deadly as the Taker. The Taker by far has the most fatalities out of all specimens. with 362 fatalities. We know absolutely nothing about Specimen 9, not that we know much about the other specimens, but Specimen 9 in particular always has been shrouded in mystery, almost like he's the true ringleader. The only thing we really know about Specimen 9 is the fact that he was, quote, too hard to contain and was killed and dismantled by GL Labs before assumingly ending up in the mansion. The only way you'll encounter Specimen 9 is by the final boss fight or going down these long hallways that are traps. However, there's actually another way to see Specimen 9, and that's waiting in a room for 2 minutes. Eventually, he'll appear, but other than that, we don't really know much about Specimen 9. He's still a mysterious figure that we don't know much about. However, he's not the most unique specimen. I think out of all the specimens that Spooky's House of Jumpscares has to offer, the most unique one by far is Specimen 12. Eventually, you'll get to room 810 and be thrown into a mansion inside a mansion. Exploring around a bit, you'll eventually stumble into a wine cellar. Picking up a note, you're told through this note on the floor that you have to hide from whatever's coming. Scrambling behind these boxes and waiting for a bit, you'll eventually get a visit from this old man with a giant scythe, and after he leaves, you're able to roam free once more. You encounter this old man a few more times before giving chase, until you eventually outrun him. What makes the old man unique is the fact that outside the mansion, in the mansion, he insta-kills you. Now, with that information, you might assume the old man is Specimen 12, you know, he acts like all the other specimens. But reading the cat DOS entry for Specimen 12, it's actually revealed that Specimen 12 is not the old man, but the mansion inside the mansion. And the old man is just the current host for Specimen 12. Through the notes you find throughout Specimen 12, it's also revealed that the old man, the one who chases you, is also the person who left the notes behind. As his final note reads, "I have a theory. I think this is a pseudo mansion. I think it's playing with my head. I still hear him. I must find that man and kill him with the sickle I found in the forest." It's moments like this that take players' expectations and completely flips them on their head. That perfectly encapsulates what Spooky's House of Jumpscares is all about. The fact that Specimen 12 is the only specimen in Spooky's House of Jumpscares, including DLC, who isn't a direct threat to the player, makes Specimen 12 stand out among even other specimens like Specimen 6, 8, 10, and 11, who all each have unique designs. On top of that, Specimen 12 is also heavily based off of an old horror game from the 90s called Clock Tower, which in of itself is a very influential game. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of specimens are based off of old horror games and horror tropes, and instead of it feeling uninspired, it takes those ideas based off of other horror media and transforms them into something even scarier than the source material. A lot of Spooky's House of Jumpscares uses a cutesy art style to falsely lure you into a grim reality filled with monsters and disturbing concepts. Hell, Spooky herself is the embodiment of that. Spooky for the most part is docile and friendly. She simply serves as the ringleader of the mansion, welcoming players in and telling them the objective. However, Spooky, despite seeming pretty uninteresting, has one of, if not the darkest backstory of any of the characters you encounter in Spooky's House of Jumpscares, including the victims you find scattered across the mansion and specimens. Spooky was only 12 years old when she was killed by her father after setting off fireworks that triggered his PTSD, prompting him to shoot her by accident. As the wiki describes it, it was a psychological episode where he began to As the wiki describes it, it was a psychological episode where he was being ambushed by soldiers. As the wiki describes it, it was a psychological episode where he began being ambushed by soldiers. It's truly one of the best indie horror games of all time, not only being one of the best, but without a doubt being one of the scariest. From disturbing concepts to horrifying monster designs, Spooky's House of Jumpscares is truly in a league of its own when it comes to scary indie horror games. Being fresh released on April 15th, 2016, Night Blights is the next stop on our adventure. Now, a lot of you might be scratching your head on why Night Blights is here. On the surface, Night Blights just seems like another cutesy indie horror game like Spooky's House of Jumpscares, and for the most part, is. However, there's some redeeming factors to Night Blights. Night Blights is part of the once niche indie horror game subsection of Survive the Night games. I say once niche because 10 years ago, the floodgates were open due to a certain bear game that I have quite a disdain for. Speaking of said bear game, Night Blights is very similar to another indie horror game that released around the time, Five Nights at Freddy's if it was obvious enough. More specifically, Five Nights at Freddy's 4. In Night Blights, you play as a little kid defending yourself and your family from evil creatures called Night Blights. You know, like the title of the game. Your goal is to defend your family by feeding the Night Blights your toys, making sure that every possible entry is shut, which includes cabinets, cabinet and the fridge, and making sure the night blights stay away from your baby brother. Just like Five Nights at Freddy's 4 and a few other indie horror games we covered, Night Blights is simply a juggling act, making sure everything's in order until morning. Now, without a doubt, Night Blights is going to be the shortest game we talk about, as it's only like an hour long, so there might be less things to talk about. Just a little heads up in case you are hoping for an in-depth lore on Night Blights, but with that all being said, I think it's about time we actually get into the game itself. The game begins with a story. As down goes the sun and up comes the moon, a terror from the darkness is coming, and soon. They hide in the shadows and strike sudden, quick, something mischievous that likes a good trick. You have one simple goal, so try to have fun. Just survive until morning and the rise of the sun. So be warned and may it fill you with fright. There's nothing scarier than a hungry night blight. So this game's main method of telling stories is through these little picture books filled with rhymes, and it's actually a pretty neat idea to tell a story because it fits so well with the premise of the game. At the beginning of every night, you're shown one of these stories that basically sums up what you have to do during the night. So let's get into the first one, which is Monday. Safe in your bed, or so it may seem, they come from below as you slumber and dream. When they close in, they growl and make noise. Best feed them quick with one of your toys. When the shadow of night falls over the globe, then you can be grabbed from any wardrobe. Keep your eyes peeled and the door firmly shut, or out they will leap, and their sharp teeth shall cut. For Monday, all you need to do is simply feed the night blights your toys when they growl from underneath your parent or sister's beds, and keep all the wardrobes closed. Failing to do so will result in death. In Night Blights, death is actually handled in a pretty interesting way. You yourself can actually die, obviously. However, your family members can also die if you do not feed the night blights quick enough. Simple as that. Although, if one of your family members do die, it's not an instant game over. In a way, it's similar to Five Nights at Freddy's Power Out, as when your family members do die, you have a certain amount of time until you finally lose. Which means if one of your family members die late in the night, it doesn't mean you don't have a chance at victory. However, just like Five Nights at Freddy's Power Out, don't rely on it too much, as eventually they will kill you. The main way you keep night blights at bay is feeding them your toys. Now that's easier said than done, as your toys aren't in one location, as they're spread across the house. And another thing that complicates that is the fact that your sister's bedroom is on the bottom floor and your parents is on the top floor. There's actually a pretty interesting feature that I've learned about recently with night blights, and that's the fact that you can tell what night blights is attacking if you hear the words they're saying. If they say the words feed me, that means it's in the parent's bedroom. If they say hungry, it's in your sister's bedroom, which is actually really cool. Now, a lot of YouTubers simply didn't pick up on this, as you're not directly told this is a thing. You eventually notice, which is something I actually like, as I'm really not a big fan of hand-holding in video games. And it's not one of those things where you necessarily need to know, it's just a fun thing you can learn that will definitely help you. Other than feeding the night blights under your family member's bed, you also have to close the wardrobes around the house, and there's quite a few of them. However, they don't open very often on Monday, so it's really not that challenging of a night. Nothing of interest is really here. However, as each night progresses, a new way the night blights to attack are added on top of the already existing ones. Speaking of which, how about we get on to Tuesday? Night blights are a threat only children can see, and the taste of small babies, it fills them with glee. When they come near, the baby shall cry. Spin the mobile swiftly, else baby will die. If the garage door opens and breathing you hear, then surely you know that a night blight is near. So press the red button and keep that door shut tight. This will keep you safe throughout the long night. Tuesday adds 2 more challenges for you to tackle. The first one is keeping your baby brother safe by spinning the mobile. If he starts to cry, that means a night blight is near, and failing to spin it in time will result, as you probably guessed, in failure. The second challenge thrown at you is the garage door. Every once in a while, you'll hear it from downstairs start to open. Your goal is to go down, climb up these boxes, and shut it before the night blights get in, while also doing the previous challenges of feeding your toys to the night blights and keeping the wardrobes closed. Like a lot of horror games, as the night progresses, the night blights become more aggressive, attacking more frequently. Night blights does something that a lot of indie horror games do when focusing on juggling multiple acts at once, and that's creating stress. While Night Blights isn't the most atmospheric thing or most horrifying, it's definitely really good at creating stress by adding more enemies every night. And as each night progresses, they get more aggressive, while also adding on to already previously existing challenges. Night Blights is constantly being compared to Five Nights at Freddy's, however I think Night Blights actually works a lot more than the original Five Nights at Freddy's does, but that's a video for a different time. In the later nights specifically, so much is going on at once that you get no time to breathe. You constantly have to be on top of everything because faltering once will result in death. It's really good at testing your skills at micromanaging. Even the most obvious of things might slip your mind as you have so much to do. It becomes very easy to get overwhelmed. But it's never to the point where it's unfair. The game doesn't become too stressful until Thursday, because up until that point, you only have really a few tasks to do. Tuesday for the most part is just the same as Monday, but with 2 extra tasks. And on top of that, those extra tasks aren't very challenging. So let's move on to Wednesday. The Blights are unclean and rival in grime, so up from their toilet, quite often they climb. Give them a flush as quick as you can, else hiding around corners will be their great plan. Blights will come down your chimney, so keep the fire alight. Use the bellows to be safe throughout the terror-filled night. For should the fire be left to wither and die, then in comes the Night Blights, all creeping and sly. Wednesday introduces 2 more tasks on top of another trick that the Night Blights pull. Throughout the nights from Wednesday and onwards, the Night Blights actually start pulling tricks on you. Sometimes they'll lock you in the bathroom, sometimes they'll have a fake Night Blight cut out, locking you in the car, turning off the lights. But on Wednesday, they also gain the ability to just walk around the house, and bumping into them, as you can probably imagine, results in death. However, just like the other threats, if they do manage to escape and roam free, it's not an instant game over, you still have a chance. You just have to dodge them. However, they make things more difficult by standing at the top of stairs or entryways to important rooms that you have to go to. Which I actually like that it doesn't instantly kill you, just have an extra challenge to worry about. Wednesday adds 2 more tasks for you to do as always. The first one is checking the toilet, as from the story in the beginning implies, they like to come up through the toilet. So every once in a while they go to the bathroom and flush them down the toilet. Basically the same thing as wardrobes, except it's toilet. And the second one is making sure the fire doesn't go out, as they like to climb down from the chimney. Now, watching multiple people play through Night Blights, this task in particular always seemed to give them trouble for some reason. It's not really that hard of a task at all you have to do is walk over to the bellow and click it a few times. It's not that hard, mate. However, I do get how some people might forget about it, as there's a bunch of things you need to do, and it doesn't make a noise, unlike the wardrobes, Night Blights in the bed, and garage door do, along with the toilet. It's something you just have to look out for. Also, now you have to watch for the fridge, as sometimes they'll come out through the fridge. I don't know how they got in there. I guess they just fucking spawned from the floor. There's also a hidden feature I never talked about, and that's the fact that you can actually fall asleep and lose. See, in a lot of 3D games, you often have a stamina bar. However, in Night Blights, losing all your stamina will result in you getting ever so more tired until eventually falling asleep, resulting in a game over. I didn't bring this up until now because it really wasn't important, as from Monday to Tuesday, you weren't probably going to see it often if you're not a complete idiot. Now, it's actually pretty easy to tell how much stamina you use by checking how slow you tend to blink, as the slower you blink, the less stamina you have to use. Wednesday is where it starts to get a little more difficult, but not too unmanageable. Because you have to worry about so many things, and as more nights add more things, it's very easy to mess up. And I see a lot of YouTubers tend to start messing up on Wednesday, because it's easy to miss things when you have so many things to do. Like, do you remember the first thing you have to do on Monday is feeding the Night Blights your toys? Well, toys are scattered all around the house, but not on the floor. Sometimes you have to climb up on bookshelves or the couch just to get to it, while also managing the wardrobes, garage door, bellow, baby brother, and toilet. It's very stressful, however it's not impossible. If you're good at micromanaging, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. However, it's probably about time we move on to Thursday. If you think you're done, a mistake has been made. They'll try even harder to make you afraid. They come ever faster for the ones you hold dear, with their traps and tricks to fill you with fear. If you see a Night Blight wandering around, try treading with care. You don't want to be found. When their presence is known, you must keep well away. Night Blights get bored when they can't find their prey. Just like every other night, Thursday adds 2 more threats. The first threat is you have to watch out for the plants around the house, as sometimes the Night Blight will be hiding in them, and once again, making treading around the house ever more difficult and terrifying. And also, the second threat being the vents. Yeah, they just Five Nights at Freddy's this shit. Thursday is where Night Blight's difficulty starts to ramp up rapidly. While Monday through Wednesday's difficulty curve is pretty fair, Thursday kicks it into high gear. While once again, it's not unfair. It's still challenging to a point where most people are not going to beat it on their first try. While Night Blights is a pretty simple game, it can be deceivingly challenging. And it's because there's so many challenges you have to do by the end of the game. And while we're talking about it, Thursday is actually the last day that adds a new task, meaning Thursday and onwards, there's no new task for you to do. All you have to do is survive with the task you already have. However, just because there's no new task added doesn't mean the game gets any easier. In fact, it gets harder as each night progresses, as I already mentioned. The Night Blights become more aggressive, and because you have so many tasks to juggle, and the Night Blights become more aggressive, slipping up is even easier. Overlooking details and missing sound cues will become a common occurrence. Not only that, but because there's so many tasks you have to do, it can feel overwhelming not knowing which one you have to do at the exact moment. Do you use the bellow to extend the fire's life, or do you go spin the mobile to save your baby brother? In the moment, it might seem obvious on what to do. However, if you go save your baby brother, that might be enough time for the fire to go out. It's a very interesting juggling act. Something I didn't mention about the game overs is that if you fail a task, you can actually see the Night Blight either escape the fireplace, crawling through the garage door, crawling from underneath the bed to kill your parents or sister, or even fall on top of your baby brother. It adds a grim detail to an already grim situation. In a way, it mocks you for your failure. Walking downstairs just to see the fire go out is soul-crushing, but not as soul-crushing as Friday. As the week's end comes closer, I fear yours does too. The Night Blights are coming, and they're coming for you. As the night passes on, their hunger it grows. What will they do when they catch you? Who knows? Just so we're clear, things are about to get worse. Your fate is now sealed, and cannot reverse. One final night, you best say goodbye, for the dawn is approaching, and with it, you die. An interesting thing I noticed while looking through the wiki and watching YouTubers' videos on Night Blights is a lot of the stories in the beginning of each day was actually changed. The original ending to Friday was actually quite uplifting, telling you the week is almost over and you almost won. However, apparently during a later update, it was changed along with the other days to be more grim. I don't know why exactly it was changed, but nonetheless it was. Anyway, Friday's difficult, yeah, obviously, it's the last night. Well, it used to be the last night. In the same update that changed the beginning stories, the developer also added 2 extra days, which we'll get into later. Friday is the same as Thursday, except a lot more challenging. Friday, without a doubt, is a gauntlet. You have to be on top of everything before it even appears. You fuck around for even a single second and it's game over. The fire goes out faster, everything opens all at once, the Night Blights roaming the house. Friday is its own entire beast. Everything is 10 times more difficult than it was on Thursday. Everything opens faster, you have less time to react. It's not uncommon for you to fail multiple tasks at once, especially the fire. They also play more tricks on you throughout Friday. And because you have so many things to do at once in a certain amount of time, falling asleep becomes extremely easy. In order to get through Friday, it's a bunch of trial and error and constantly being on top of everything. 9 times out of 10, finishing Friday means clutching out by waiting in one of the rooms far away from any other Night Blights. There'll be times throughout Friday where multiple Night Blights are either free or need to be dealt with, so it won't be unexpected for a Night Blight to be attacking your baby brother, parents, and sister all at once, and you can only move your stubby little leg so fast. Just like Thursday, prioritizing certain tasks over others is important to your survival. You very rarely ever have a chance to breathe. When you eventually finish it, it is rewarding. However, like I mentioned a minute prior during the later update, the developer actually added 2 more days, which is Saturday and Sunday, which means your job is still far from over. There's so many parts I have to collect, so my family I can protect. I will build a tool that is fearsome and grand, which will help me to make my final stand. Now, unlike Monday through Friday, Saturday and Sunday are almost completely different. While, yeah, you're still wandering around the house, you have different objectives instead of hiding from the Night Blights. On Saturday and Sunday, you actually get to fight back against them. No longer are you afraid of them. For Saturday, all you have to do is walk around the house and find the parts for this big-ass gun, I guess. And it actually tells you where each part is, so instead of wandering wander around the house aimlessly, you actually know where to go. While you still have to defend yourself and your family from the night blights, as if you didn't it would be a complete cakewalk, it's not as challenging as Friday was. However, that still means your family can die, while all the threats from Friday are still here, just toned down a lot. Because if they weren't, it would be almost impossible to actually collect the things you need. Because instead of collecting them all and them automatically teleporting to your toy box, you actually have to carry them to the toy box, which is pretty neat. There's also a new room, which is the attic, which has its own wardrobes to close. But other than that, it's still Friday, but instead of surviving, you have to scavenge for items. It's not until Sunday where the game does a complete 180. Now my weapon is ready to roll. I can fight back and take back control. Round any corner they can be, and they'll be looking for me. They are so hungry and bored with their tricks. Must now kill them by finding glow sticks. If I can win and keep them at bay, then they'll be gone before the next day. We finally arrive to Sunday, the last day, and unlike every other night, this time you actually fight back. Sunday is completely different from every other night. You remember on Saturday how you were collecting items around the house? Well, apparently those items, when combined, make a gun, just a flat out gun. However, this time the night blights will be roaming free. During Sunday, there's actually 3 different blights that roam the house. The first one being the standard night blight, the second one being the ones that crawl on the floor, and then the third one being the brutes. The standard night blight doesn't do anything special, they simply die in 1 hit. The ones that crawl on the floor will directly seek you out, and the brutes will take 2 hits to die. Now, if you had infinite ammo, this would be incredibly easy. However, in order to get ammo, you still have to wander around the house to find glow sticks, which also remedies the issue of hiding in one room because you'll eventually run out of ammo. And it's not like you can go on a hunting mission where you seek out every night blight. You still have to conserve your ammo, as there's a limited amount around the map, just like the toys. On top of that, your jump has also been gimped, so you can't hide on top of furniture, which is actually pretty cool. It seems like the developer actually thought this through, which is rare for the indie horror game scene. Now, killing night blights is not entirely easy, as throughout the night, as 7 AM inches closer, the night blights, like before, will become more aggressive. While in the beginning of the night everything is basically closed, throughout the night everything starts to open again, and by the end of the night, you have to face a horde of them. As the night progresses, ammo becomes more scarce, night blights become more frequent. Very simple. However, I really like this idea of turning the tables. The entire game you're hiding and protecting yourself and your family against the night blights, and on Sunday you finally get the chance to get your revenge. Sunday makes you feel like this is the last stand. Once you make it through the night, you and your family are safe from the blights. Now, getting to the end isn't that easy, as the night blights don't randomly spawn around the house for you to go and kill. They actually spawn in waves, which means you're not actually surviving into 7 AM. You simply have to kill a certain amount of waves in order to beat Sunday. After getting through a certain amount of waves, you can finally rest easy knowing that the night blight threat has finally been extinguished. And that was the end of night blights. Despite being 8 years old at this point, Night Blight still holds up incredibly well compared to, well, a bunch of indie horror games. For such a simple premise, the developer was able to make a decently good indie horror game. While it's not perfect, it still has its flaws, it doesn't mean it's not a really good indie horror game. Being first released on May 29th, 2014, Among the Sleep is our final stop in this nostalgic trip down classic indie horror game lane. It's also 10 years old, by the way, so let that sink in. Among the Sleep is often forgotten, but without a doubt is definitely one of the most classic indie horror games. In Among the Sleep, you play as a 2-year-old going through a nightmare land to find your mother, along with the help of your trusty teddy bear. Among the Sleep is a very weird game, in not only premise, but gameplay itself. Among the Sleep is by far the most different game I've ever discussed. It's not like any other horror game I've discussed in the past. While most horror games I discuss are grounded in some sort of reality, Among the Sleep is so beyond weird, but in a good way. At first it starts relatively normal, but around the 20-minute mark, things quickly become bizarre. Strange occurrences happen all around the house, and eventually you leave the house entirely. However, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Among the Sleep is a very simple game. You don't have to defend yourself, you don't have to fight enemies, all you do is explore, which is an interesting approach to a horror game, but that doesn't mean it lacks qualities that the other 2 indie horror games we discussed in this video have. But in order to elaborate on those qualities, we have to actually get into the game itself, so let's do that. The game begins with an LSD trip. No, just kidding, you're drinking out of a bottle. After putting the glass down, it becomes apparent that you're currently celebrating your birthday with your mother finishing your cake over in the corner over there. While prepping the cake, you do get some time to look around and interact with some toys. Eventually, your mother does come over with the cake. About fucking time, mama. After feeding us only one bite, she scurries off as there's a knock on the door. While she's gone, this weird distortion effects happens, which isn't explained at the moment, but will become more apparent as the game progresses. When she comes back, she's holding a present. Where did it come from? Well, we don't actually learn until later in the game. And when I mean later, I mean in the ending. But before we can open the present, she takes us upstairs, in this very weird angle. And in the background, you can notice the darkness is following us, as it always seems to do. When you're left all alone in your room, you can once again explore your surroundings. You have a few basic things, like having to use the environment around you to climb, grabbing things, and a bunch of other useful information. After wandering around a bit, you can find the teddy bear, which is actually alive and is hiding in a toy chest. After releasing him from his prison, he talks to you about a bunch of useless mumbo jumbo, and after he's done rambling about whatever, he asks you if you want to play a game, and without even answering him, he forces you to anyway. I'm getting some weird vibes from this teddy bear. After playing around a bit, he tells you to pick him up and walk into the closet. Wait, hold on, I don't like where this is going. Anyway, after you get in the closet, you're basically done with the bedroom. The bedroom simply served as a tutorial where you can learn the main mechanics of the game, and while in the closet, you learn the last mechanic, hugging Teddy, which is used as a flashlight. Anyway, after going through this really sketchy area that's somehow in your closet, you're eventually found by your mother and swiftly put to bed. After being put to bed, this is where Among the Sleep stops being normal and starts to begin a shift until something more bizarre. After some time, you are suddenly awoke by, oh god, Teddy! Teddy, hold on, no! They took Teddy! Those bastards! And afterwards, they throw us out of our crib. These atrocities will not go unpunished. Now it's time to go find Teddy. After finding Teddy in the washing machine, he tells you that something isn't right, and they need to find your mother. You immediately find out he's telling the truth, as leaving the room, things become even weirder. Teddy tells us we have to be quiet or it will find us, whatever it is. And going into the living room, you find out what it is. Now, instead of being quiet, you have to use these sofas and tables to stealthily make your way to the kitchen, and once you reach the kitchen, once again, you have to sneak your way through the cabinets, push your chair up to the door, and open it up. Now, from this point on, instead of walking you through the entire game like I typically do in these videos, instead I want to focus more on the story, as in Among the Sleep, it's undoubtedly the most important part. While the gameplay is rather basic for the most part, the story is surprisingly complex. While even now, the story isn't super clear, we do know a fair amount. So why don't we actually get into it? But before we actually do it, I want to start by saying most of this information is from Super Horror Bros Mike's video on Among the Sleep, and without it, this part would have been a complete mess. Anyway, let's start with the beginning. As I already mentioned, the beginning of the game starts with a birthday party, your birthday party. When your mother gets up to answer the door, if you're listening closely, you can hear her start to argue with someone at the door. And as you can probably already guess, the person at the door is your father. Your father is the person who brought you the gift, which is Teddy. When she comes back, she has the gift pretending that she was the one who got it for you. No doubt as a way to make the child not know their father. As from the argument a minute prior, it seems neither of them are on good terms. While the father wants to have a relationship with his son, the mother desperately tries to make that not happen, and it's not until the end of the game where we understand why. When mother brings you upstairs to open your gift, she is once again interrupted by the phone call, which is probably your father. Eventually, the events that I mentioned earlier about Teddy occur. You know, you find Teddy, you go in the closet with him, you go to this weird area, you go to bed, and finally wake up to being thrown out of your crib. After wandering out of the room and freeing Teddy from his washing machine prison, you encounter a shadow monster when going downstairs. What the shadow monsters are is not clear at the moment. However, as the game progresses, it slowly starts to make sense. After walking to the basement, you and Teddy enter a dream dimension filled with only your memories, and this is where most of the lore and story starts to be pieced together. While in this dream world, your goal is to find all 4 special memory items to open up new portals to find your mother. The first memory item being a locket that your mother wears, which is from your grandmother. Through finding each memory item, you are transported to a new nightmare location, from playgrounds to abandoned houses, all the way up to the closet from the beginning of the game. and in each new location you are hunted down by new creatures representing aspects of the child's life, and each one of them will be explained once the plot twist has been revealed. The second memory item you have to find is the music box, which is the same music box the mother uses to put you to bed. The third memory item being the storybook the mother reads to you before bed, and the final memory item being a stuffed elephant, which is the same stuffed elephant that Teddy hid from the beginning of the game. Getting all the memory items are not as easy as you may thought, as you have to go through puzzle-filled and monster-infested levels in order to reach each memory item. However, once you traverse your way through each level, you eventually get the final memory item, and is able to start the ritual. However, before you and Teddy can escape, you are grabbed by the Heap, one of the monsters that you have to avoid. Before you and Teddy can escape, the Heap takes Teddy away, ripping his arm off, while you fall into the abyss, which this one action of the Heap ripping Teddy will become more depressing as you travel through the abyss, learning just what these monsters are. But I feel that's best explained once we get to the end. After going back to the portal room and using Teddy's severed arm to open the portal back home, once you return home, you walk out of your closet only to find your room in absolute ruin. Walking through the house, it's barren, the curtains are shut, the place is a mess, and everything is in disarray. Walking to the kitchen, you come face to face with the monster, your mother, and upon getting too close, she shoves you away while breaking down. A knock can be heard at the door. Upon investigating, you are met with the voice of your father, and that's how Among the Sleep ends. Now that we've gotten to the end of Among the Sleep, it's about time we explain what in God's name is going on. Now, this is the final spoiler warning. If you've never experienced Among the Sleep, you definitely should go out of your way just to do so. However, for the rest of you, let's continue. Let's start with the beginning again. As I mentioned, when your mother walks away, she gets into an argument with someone who is your father. So, we're already off to a bad start. However, I never explained why you never get to see your father. If it wasn't obvious enough, the mother and father are divorced, as a result of the father's tendency to prioritize his work over anything else, even his child. Eventually they separate, which leads to the events of Among the Sleep. After the father was denied access to see his son's birthday, he gives the mother the gift, which is Teddy. Now, the more astute viewer may have noticed that Teddy and the father sound identical, besides the fact that they're voiced by the same person, who you may know for some rather famous voices. However, my mind is drawing a blank when I'm trying to think of any. Strange. Anyway, the reason why they sound identical is because Teddy is supposed to represent the father. Now, apparently the father isn't as nice as he seems, as in the DLC, which I'm not going to be discussing. It's revealed that he's just as in the wrong as the mother is, but that's besides the point. After the mother and father separate, the mother began to spiral into a deep depression, eventually turning to alcohol as a coping mechanism. The monsters you see throughout your adventures are representations of your mother, and the monster she became after divorce, soon after beginning to neglect her son. Each monster you encounter represents certain aspects of your mother besides the first monster you see, the Shadow. The Shadow actually represents the absence of your father. The second monster you encounter is named Harold, same as the Shadow, however with the addition of an umbrella. This represents the beginning of the mother's alcohol abuse. The next monster you encounter is Haida, which is a representation of the mother when she starts to drink. The final monster you encounter is called the Heap. They represent the mother when she's drunk, and this is confirmed by the ending, when the Heap rips Teddy's arm off, which you can find the other half of Teddy with your mother, the same half that was ripped off by the Heap. It's clear that Teddy was ripped after the mother tries snatching it away, only for the bear to tear. The most likely reason for her trying to take Teddy away is because it's from your father. It reminds her of him. You having it is a constant reminder. Indie horror games can be a mixed bag when it comes to, well, a lot of things like story and gameplay. However, sometimes indie horror games can not only pull it off, but do it in an almost perfect manner. While the 3 games I just talked about for however long this video has been going on for are not perfect, it definitely doesn't take away from the fact that each and every one of them were, without a doubt, extremely good indie horror games, leagues above the slot being produced today. And while classic indie horror games are not always, well, good, a lot of them still surprisingly hold up today, and these 3 examples are just the top of the iceberg, and I do look forward to one day revisiting some more classic indie horror games, but for now, I think we've reached the end. Good night, ladies and gentlemen, and happy Halloween.